Hello, this is Christian Luderman, and today's video is about how to prepare for an Angular interview. The background for this video is I had done this process numerous times myself, and I kind of found a system and some commonalities that might help you for your Angular interview. And the process is typically that the interview is 1 hour, and in that 1 hour you want to sell yourself as good as possible. Typically it follows this structure. You start with some basic either algorithm questions or JavaScript related questions and code assignments, and then you transition over to the pure Angular aspect. So the interviewer wants to see if you are a overall rounded developer that both know the JavaScript technical and has some computer science background or knowledge in the basic algorithms and data structures, because you're going to use that knowledge even when you develop Angular applications and something that could be considered more higher level of abstraction. You want to have this background in algorithms and data structures, and then you want to be able to apply that in the JavaScript assignments and questions, and of course in the Angular assignments as well. Before we get into how you should prepare for your Angular interview, there are some books that might help you, and these books are not Angular related, but they're related to coding interviews and getting a job in general. So the Cracking the Coding Interview is a very good book with lots of practical computer science questions that you might want to solve using JavaScript to prepare for your coding interview. And then the Google resume is like a complete guide to how you should go from applying for the job, and also a part about how you should do the coding interview. But Cracking the Coding Interview is more specialized in the actual coding interview. The basic algorithm and data structure knowledge you need to know is you just need to know some basic data structures, because these data structures are structures that are seen again and again independent of what programming language you are working with. So having a background in this is going to help you solve a numerous of different problems. For each of these data structures, you want to be able to do the basic CRUD operations, and that is, you need some knowledge about how to query the given data structure, and that could be search, traversing, and for trees there's depth first and breadth first, and of course you want to be able to add, update, and remove. And that's actually the basic operations, and you should know these for every one of the data structures, and you will be pretty confident in using these. And also you should have an idea about when to use which data structure. For example, you see the hash tables are often used for performance optimizing, for doing a direct lookup, and graphs are good at mapping out relationships. The common JavaScript code assignments you might meet are the reversing of a string, where you are asked to replay the string in reversed order, and could be you need to remove duplicates from a number array so the no number are repeated twice. It could be you need to do some search in a nested object. It could be that you need to sort an array of objects by name property. When you do this, you might also be tested in if you're able to do this using the ESX operators, because they're usually faster and more efficient than doing it all with like old school JavaScript. Let me talk a little bit about how you should solve these coding assignments, because you don't want to just dive right into the coding and just try to find a way out, because that's never gonna work out well, because you are not having the broad overview, and you're probably making lots of errors and are wasting a lot of time on implementation, wrong stuff, instead of getting it right first and then iteratively implement the real solution. The first thing you want to do is you want to solve the problem conceptually, and that means that you look at the problem and you forget about all your computer science background or whatever you have, and you just think in logical steps. What steps should occur for the ended result to happen? And you just do step 1, step 2, step 3, and now we're here. And you try to do it start with one given input and say, if I take this in here and I do these steps, I end up with this output. And when you get that right, you try to test it with a more difficult example, and you take some other more complex input and you assert for a given output is true. And then you have these solved conceptually, you're ready to move on to the pseudocode, where you take these logical steps and you just write them out as comments. And then finally you solve it using real code, where you should have some awareness about what data structures and algorithms you're going to use for the solution and how to actually implement it in the given language. And here it's going to be JavaScript or it's going to be TypeScript, depending on what the interviewer wants to see, but both of these languages are pretty similar, as you might know. So let's look at an example of how to do this. So my last blog post was about how to do tree searching with JavaScript. And this is a common question that you might see. And to do this, I created an example of how to do this using the 3-step process. And the first step is you solve it conceptually. And you take some input and you make it end up with some given output. And then after this is true, you might want to switch stuff around in here, and you see that it's still gonna hold true, these inputs and outputs. And when you want to solve this conceptually, you just think about, okay, what logical steps should be true for this here to end up with this here. So it's something like you need to check if first of all, you need to check that if this is the given value, or if not, you need to take like all the children and it needs to like repeat the first step, and if it doesn't have any hits, then it just needs to return false, and that should be it. And then we actually have the logic here, so we just write that up as pseudocode. And then we come to the implementation, where we, from our computer science background, it should kick in here, and we should know about broad first and depth first search algorithms, and we should start talking about that here. We should conveying that we actually know the theory about this stuff here, because for this question, this is clearly what the interviewer wants you to talk about, that he wants you to show off that you know this. And then you might, if you want to really show off, you just solve it using both of these, or you just pick one and say, I'm going to do the first here, but it doesn't really matter because the data set is random, so you don't know what algorithm is going to traverse the desired node first. Because you know these basic algorithms, you just start implementing them, and you see from the conceptual solution that there was some recursion here. And you should know that whenever you find recursion, it can either be solved using recursion, or it can be solved using an iterative approach. And then you might do both just to show off, or you might take one and just talk about the other one. The more you can show off, the better, the more confident you're gonna look. And then this one here is the first with recursion, and it kind of makes for an elegant solution here compared to the little longer iterative approach where you're gonna implement this stack. And after the coding assignment, there might be some JavaScript specific questions that you should be prepared to talk about, and that could be what's the difference between let, const, and var for variables, and you should know that the let is block scope and the const is also block scope but read only, and then the var is function scoped. So you just hit that one out of the park. And they might ask, is the JavaScript passed by value or passed by reference? And you should know that it's passed by reference. So that's why whenever you pass a value to a function, if you modify that input, you're also going to modify the original value. And you should know the basic ESX operators. That could be something like the split operator. It could be map, reduce, filter. It's what is used all the time these days to solve basic operations. And then you are past the JavaScript part. You are going to go to the Angular part. You might be thinking, why did they test me in the JavaScript part when this is an Angular position? Well, they want to test that you are like an all-round profile, and the way they do that is also testing you in JavaScript, because it's actually pretty easy to just learn Angular. You can like take an Angular bootcamp, and you can actually know the basic stuff pretty fast without even having a computer science background. But if you don't like have the in-depth understanding of how you should write code and how basic data structures and algorithms work, then you're going to run into problems whenever you need to step out of a framework. And in complex solutions, you need to step out of the framework, and you need to be able to innovate and create stuff for yourself. So when you go to the Angular code assignment, they might ask you to code up some basic Angular app, and it's almost always going to be some basic CRUD application where you're going to do some HTTP call with routing, because that's basically what it is most of the time. And then because they want to test you in the hard part of Angular development, and that is RxJS. So you should be confident in these reactive operators. I actually wrote a blog post about that. You can check it here. You can see my blog post here about learning observables by learning the 10 most used operators, at least in my opinion. And if you know these and you are confident in these, it should give you a pretty good start. The coding assignment might happen in StackBlitz, where you're gonna pair program with the interviewer, so he can get a feel of how it is to work with you. And for this interview and this pair programming, you should just be open for feedback, and as long as you have a background in this, you should just trust your gut and just try to solve it as simple as possible. Don't try to overcomplicate it to show off, because that's not what is valuable. You just want to solve small programming problems as easy as possible. Then after the pair programming session, he might ask you some Angular specific theory questions, and that could be the Angular component lifecycle hooks, template driven versus reactive forms, or something about the rendering engine or the change detection, about how that works. The Angular component lifecycle ensures that you can hook into specific events in Angular, and you can trigger some logic to be run at different times. The thing you want to know about here is what they are, which order they run, and what you should do where. So the first thing that's going to run, if you have some data bound input properties, and that will trigger the ng-on changes. So for example, if you set some logic up here where you want to run some logic when specific inputs changes, you can do it here. Actually, you can also do it with if you have a setter property of the input property in the component. And a lot of the time, I think that's actually more, it's type safe first of all, and it's easier because encapsulating the logic for the given property, and I like that. Then you have the ng on init. There's ng on init, and there's the constructor that is often confused for where you should put logic. And the constructor is used for the IOC, the dependency instantiation only. And then you should do the actual init logic on the ng on init. ng do check is run every time Angular does a check. It shouldn't be used very often unless you're doing some performance optimization where you want to trigger something here. Normally, if you don't do anything fancy, you don't need to do anything here. And then the ng after content init is used whenever you're working with constant children and you want to set the reference. The ng after content init is used when you need to access a constant child. Then the ng after content check is run, and then you have the ng after view init is run whenever you need to access a view child. And this is here, it's going to be available, and then right after that it's going to do the ng after view check. And then you have the ng on destroy, where you need to be sure to run the destruction logic. You need to be sure to unsubscribe observables and such. And they might ask you about what is the difference between template-driven and reactive forms. And in short, you can say template-driven forms is easy to use. It's for simple use cases. It has this easy two-way binding using ng model, and it's good for easy and simple use cases. And also it's imported using forms module. Whereas the reactive forms is more for like complex and more dynamic use cases where you can use it, for example, to render some stuff and some page with a corresponding form dynamically, because it enables you to write up the form as TypeScript, and it uses reactive forms module. And then they might ask you about the internals of Angular, and you should know about what zone does and how the change detection works. And whenever a change happens in Angular, this tick happens, and this tick is going to trigger the zone.js callbacks. And what zone.js does, it sets up some callbacks that are going to be called for every asynchronous event in Angular. And an asynchronous event is going to trigger a tick in Angular that is going to render the Angular component tree. And Angular has two ways of doing change detection. It has the default, where it's just going to render it on every tick, that is on every asynchronous event. And it has the more performance optimized way, where you only do the rendering whenever the change detection is registering that an input to the component has changed, or if the component is marked for check explicitly, or if some mouse click event is happening directly inside the component. So this is ensuring better performance because it's gonna render components less. For some closing tips, you should read the Angular documentation. You should be familiar with that stuff. And then you should remember that a lot of the outcome already is done before the coding interview. Of course, you want to optimize for doing it as well as possible, because that's gonna raise your chances for getting a job. But then remember, if you really want to buy some product, and you go to the store and there's a really bad salesperson, does it really matter that he might be new, he might be really bad at selling the stuff, if you really know it's a good product? So for example, if you have a very strong reputation, you have a lot of nice recommendations, referrals, and you have a blog with a lot of followers, and you can just look at your blog and you look and see you talk for hours as an expert about stuff, then you can pretty much fail as bad, you can fail really bad at the interview and still get the job. So you want to optimize for the best interview, but remember that a lot of the outcome is already decided before the interview. See you next time, and remember to subscribe.